the way people thought in the dot-com bubble, and then thought that was totally a hype and would never happen. And then it did eventually happen, just took longer. And so you need to be, as a founder, you need to be right about this general direction in your idea, but also you need to be right at the right time.
Welcome to the CEO DNA, the podcast where we uncover what really drives today's top founders. And today we are in San Francisco. So in San Francisco, we need to talk about AI. So I'm super happy to have a very intense chat with my special guest, Richard Socher, a true AI pioneer, Stanford PhD, and founder and CEO of U.com, the search engine that really is boldly taking on Google and Microsoft. So I'm super looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the CEO DNA podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to chat.
So what is for you a good DNA of a CEO?
I think there are a couple of things I look for also when I invest. One is just a lot of intellectual horsepower, just like raw intelligence is definitely a good base, but it's definitely also not enough. Then you need to layer on probably the second most important thing is a lot of grit, just not having a lot of giving up in you. Ideally, that grit can sometimes come from stubbornness of some kind. Sometimes it comes from just strong vision alignment of what you want your company's impact to be on the world. And then it's just this, and it's part of grit is just not giving up, but also iterating, like having a learning mindset, a growth mindset, that you can always be better, but you'll probably never be done. Mark Hawkins, at the former Salesforce CFO, he would always say better, never done. And that kind of stuck with me. And I think it's a really good motto to have. And then of course there's sort of various ways, and many paths lead to Rome, if you will, like some CEOs just are very introvert and they make that work. Others are very extrovert and they can make that work. So there's a lot of different personas within the CEO world too. Sometimes if you're too much of an empathetic person, it gets even harder, right? Now you feel the stress even more, everyone being responsible, or you're being responsible for everyone's jobs and so on. And that can make life even harder, so that you need to find even better ways to cope with that stress that you have. And then, I think, part of the grit might also be just excitement and wanting to win in some ways. It's certainly also very helpful for CEO.
I think it's super interesting when we look at your life. So you born in East Germany, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Was it Leipzig? Yeah.
Dresden.
When did you move on then?
I actually lived in Ethiopia for a couple of years too, and then lived in Bozeman, Montana for a year as a high school exchange student, finished my high school in Dresden, and then went to Leipzig for beginning of undergrad, lived in Montpellier for a year, did an exchange year there in southern France, did my master's in Saarbrücken, then I had a short stint in Princeton before I started my PhD at Stanford.
What did all those changes change in you? That you moved all over those places. Did you ever felt home?
I didn't really. I think after 3-4 years of living in one apartment during my PhD, that was the first time where I came home after Christmas trip or something. I'm like, oh, I'm home now. I arrived home. So there's a good like 10 plus years. Ever since 8th grade, basically, I've never lived anywhere longer than 2 years until my PhD at Stanford. And so that changes you, right? You just don't have as much of a friend network, if you will, that you would do if you had lived in your hometown.
Yeah. But now the Bay Area became your home. And also it made you very successful, the ecosystems environment. First, of course, in the academic world where you studied, but also was later also being an assistant professor and later also professor at Stanford.
Adjunct professor, and kinds of professor.
But really, because I also had the chance to talk to some of your students. One was, of course, your co-founder now. And I think it's so fascinating to really shine in the academic world, but then later also in the business world. Why is that the case? Why do you think does this transition actually happens? Because I don't hear it so often.
Yeah, I think it's academics are also pretty broad, and there are a
Right.
lot of different personalities as academia. And for me, it was often about where do I maximize the positive impact I have on humanity and the world in the future. And uh, to me, that was obviously in academia for a very long time. I love the idea that if you invent something, even if you're a little bit early, if it's the right general direction, you can integrate kind of your impact over a very long time horizon.
Right.
And on the other side of the spectrum, if you're right and early as an academic, you're a visionary.
Yes.
If you're right and early as a founder, your company might just be dead. Because there's so many previous versions of smartphones, and they're just not quite there yet. It was just a little too early, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people talked about various sort of in the first .com bubble, things that were overhyped, but then eventually actually turn out to be right. Like you are now buying everything online. The way people thought in the .com bubble and then thought, oh, that was totally a hype and would never happen. And then it did eventually happen, just took longer. And so you need to be, as a founder, you need to be right about this general direction in your idea, but also you need to be right at the right time. And so as an academic, we often think about the future, and that's something that is very helpful as a founder too. You just need to tone it down, how visionary it is, and bring it and make it more pragmatic. And so there's a lot there. Then I was fortunate enough to already started during my PhD. I was already enabled to basically mentor other people. My advisor, Andrew Ng and Chris Manning, both of them were very popular, and they had a lot of students. And Andrew in particular sort of said, all right, as my PhD students, you can mentor bachelor students and master students. And so I enjoyed that. I enjoyed mentoring also folks. And so that is something that you do as a good CEO. You also do that for your employees. And then just thriving in, I think, uncertainty is something that also helps as an academic. But there are also some downsides, right? As an academic, you might not care enough about money and revenue, but that's, I sometimes joke, there's only one thing a company can't do, and that's run out of money. If you don't do that, you can try a lot of more things and get better and better and iterate and so on. And so as an academic, you have to really make sure that the impact is measurable, and it's measurable in dollars.
Yeah. But also measured actually also how often you're cited, and your publications get cited massively. I think one of the highest when it also comes to AI or NLP, the natural language processing. Why did this part is exciting you so much? Why do you really like this so much?
I mean, it is how, you measure impact as an academic,
Right.
is through citations. And so in some ways, I actually think the world would be better off if most people knew the top most cited people in all the various different subjects of AI and biology and chemistry and physics and so on, rather than, who shot more 3-pointers or hit more home runs. I think those are, in the grand scheme of humanity, not going to be that relevant in 100 years from now, but people who have had a lot of impact with their ideas are going to be relevant for a very long time. So I think, it's one way to measure impact, and so I think it's a good one. It's also, to some degree, led me to become an entrepreneur in the first place, because of all the citations I already had during the PhD. I had venture capital folks reach out to me at the end of my PhD saying, hey, wow, you're in AI. We love AI. You're already having like thousands of citations, many thousands. And like, we want to fund you to take some of those ideas and see if they can be useful in a corporate company context, in a startup. And I was like, oh, wow, I thought I was going to become a professor. And so it was really thanks to investors that I went down this path. And, their interest was partially because of citations too. So it's generally a good thing to try to maximize if you're an academic.
I think it's such a power to know details and also the academic world and really how theory works, and also then transform it into the practical world, into, the product market fit and in all the details. I think that's very powerful. You did this in 2014 when you started the company MetaMind. What was behind this? What did actually MetaMind do?
Yeah, so MetaMind was basically a general purpose AI platform that allowed any company to train their own neural networks and make it very, very easy. In some ways, it built almost too much technology. We allowed people to label their data, to clean it up, to get analyses of experimental runs. And there are multiple companies later on that tackle just one of those things and they become billion-dollar companies. And so we chewed on quite a bit. And that's why that technology there ultimately proved very useful in the hands of another company that actually had those real use cases. And so we're just, eventually got acquired by Salesforce. And there, the generality was very powerful. But in a small startup, it was clear that we had to like focus more on very narrow use cases. And so we started having success in a few, but then it just felt like the impact for the foreseeable future was much, much higher inside a bigger
Wow.
company.
Why did you sold your company then to Salesforce? What was the initiator that you said, okay, I'm not building this massive unicorn world empire. I actually pass my baby on.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. Number one was that Salesforce was a phenomenal company, and they had the, no pun intended, sales force to really bring AI into tons of different other companies. And the goal for MetaMind was that everyone should be able to train a neural net, and that now feels very obvious because there's so many open source version code bases out there, and so many different products that let you do that. But that wasn't the case back then, like over 10 years ago. And so we wanted to bring that technology into the hands of many other companies, and Salesforce does exactly that, right? They help a lot of other companies, especially SMBs, but also many massive enterprises that don't have huge technology teams themselves and can spend billions of dollars on R&D and things like that. And so that vision alignment was a huge factor. And then, of course, you have to also think about, okay, like how well are you able to sell? And to be honest, at the time, I was still an academic to a large degree. And I hadn't thought enough about how to sell really well. And that's something that, we fixed now with View.com, and sales team is doing a phenomenal job. We hired the right people. We built the right infrastructure for strong sales, but we didn't have that. And so it was very obvious that for quite some time, the impact was much larger being part of a bigger organization.
Very interesting. Yeah. And then you actually also joined Salesforce.
Yep.
So let's go back. So we talk about academic, we talk about being a brutal entrepreneur, and then also be in a corporate job, actually work for Salesforce and work on a project called Einstein. Is it correct? Einstein. So it's kind of the AI arm for Salesforce. How long were you there? What did you learn coming from your company? How many people were working at that point of 25, and then working in a corporation with, at this time, sells 500 plus people. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. A lot of people ask me like, how bad was it? And I was like, it wasn't bad at all. It was like, it was great. Yeah. Like, I think there are a lot of really kind and smart people that work hard and try to do the right thing. And of course, the more people there are, right, not everyone will have the same opinion. So you have to navigate that, and you have to learn in the organization who's calling the shots and who's making various decisions, and how you really get a product, not just in front of customers for a demo, but really at scale, and how's it being sold and everything. But all of those made sense, and I actually learned a lot. I learned a lot about general, enterprise SaaS software and sales and so on. It was a very powerful time for me. Salesforce is a very kind company. They support you in many different ways. They help and give you coaches and so on if you want to, and really accelerate. And so, yeah, I had a phenomenal time there. I think Mark's a phenomenal CEO.
What is one learning that you can share with us, with the CEOs and founders listening from the corporate world? Because lots of starters in business quite young and they stick in the entrepreneurial path. But what did you actually learn from the corporate world, where you said, "Wow, I wouldn't have known that if I joined"?
I mean, there's just so many things. There's just like some obvious things of how you properly structure a sales team with pre-sales, and actually having like personal relationships, and having forward deployed engineers, and building out demos, and having like well done forecasts, and then having solutions engineers and customer success folks coming in. It's just like a lot
Really
of
the old structure.
and then just like, you can't just be like, hey, this is the best software, please buy it, like, and just like, there's a whole process to it, and just like appreciating that, is something I've learned. And then of course, like from Mark also, he has a phenomenal balance of just like strong listening and collecting information, and from time to time making like a few very good decisions, right? And you hear that also from folks like Jeff Bezos and others who are just like, you have to make few but very good decisions every week. And so, yeah, those.
I think it's very interesting, because I also studied Salesforce quite intense, because I think it's very interesting and how they are set up as a company. Also, how they we talk about sales. I just talked to somebody the other day, and he won a car from them. So basically, they even know better than me. They do the big events with the salespeople, and as a bonus, they do get watches, cars, or big checks. And I think it's quite interesting how they really motivate the employees by having, for example, the bonus not kept, and also doing their small cocktail events in different cities. I think that's so interesting and deep to implement. I actually implemented it also in one of our companies, where we do now in different cities in Germany, different cocktail events or evening events, and just meet the customer on a more personal level. I think that's very deep and essential to that world. Yeah.
And then there's like matrix structure. There's so many different ways, just like how many people should you manage? How do you set up managers of managers, and eventually, like different hierarchies and things like that? And how flat can you keep it versus, when do people feel like, okay, I'm stuck in this one like role and I can't grow anymore, and like so on. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of like interesting human psychology in there.
Yeah. So you worked at Salesforce then as chief scientist till 2020, but then at one point you said, no, time to go back to be a brutal entrepreneur, and you started U.com. How did it change happen? Why now was this?
Again, it was all about the impact. We set up Einstein. Salesforce was on an amazing trajectory, and we had invented prompt engineering. Brian McCann and I, my co-founder, the idea had been picked up by OpenAI, and they cited the paper and everything. But we felt like clearly we could now give people better answers. And at the time, still, Google didn't really improve. It was fairly stagnant for many years. So they didn't have to. There's such a powerful monopoly. And so we felt like we should give people better answers. And for a while, we thought that should be as a consumer-like company, but eventually realized really the most complex answers are usually asked by people in a work setting, not on Google, where they just ask, what's the weather tomorrow? What was the score of the game? What's the price of the stock? And just the majority of these questions that people ask on a Google-like interface are fairly simple, and you can't really shine with AI as much. But at the time, we thought clearly we can give people better answers than lists of links, and that was sort of the kernel, thinking about how to make that AI research be actually impactful in the here and now. And so I thought about it, talked to Mark about it, and just didn't feel like it made sense to start a new kind of search engine, even though now it's more of an enterprise productivity engine actually, but at the time a consumer search engine inside another enterprise company.
I think it's so powerful. You said it very sound, but I need to repeat it very loud, that you guys are the inventor of the prompt engineer. I think that's a bold invention, of course, that I think especially now, it really changed a lot, and I think it's still going to change a lot. How did you come up at this time when people didn't really spoke about it at all, about prompt engineer?
Yeah, it was my goal. It's very technical, but I've been a big fan of pre-training, trying to take as much data as you can and train as general purpose of an intelligence model. And that started with word vectors, then became contextual vectors. So you cannot just learn about, cat and dog are similar, but you have to say like, oh, a cat is running around the house is very similar to my house cat is walking around my place, and so it's like you learn that these contextual vectors are also similar, and that helps with NLP and language understanding. And then we said, well, we want to pre-train everything, not just like an encoder for a sentence, but really the input and the output. Language is always about back and forth, asking questions, getting answers, and things like that. And so we said, let's reframe everything as a question over some kind of input that gets an answer. And that question could be, what's the translation of that sentence? What's the summary of this paragraph? Who's the president of Jamaica? Like whatever it might be. And you would always have one model that could give you that answer. And that idea was so non-obvious that the paper got massively rejected. As all public, you can see it online. And it's so obvious in retrospect that people are like, you didn't even invent that. Of course, you would just ask a model a question like that. You can't even invent that. It's so obvious. But it was like a very interesting transition over a fairly short amount of time, from super controversial to super obvious. And
Right. And your PhD was also a little bit about this.
yeah, it's also neural networks, trying to train one type of model for all different kinds of problems in natural language processing. So it's been a dream of mine for over decades.
Yeah, that's why I thought it's very interesting. I love this topic as well. If I would put your PhD in front of you today again, would you stand by everything that's in it, or would you laugh at certain paragraphs?
I don't think I would laugh at it. It's just like there are certain models, and the model family that I explored to a large degree in my PhD was not quite as efficiently trainable on GPUs. And GPUs ended up being the best way to train neural networks. And so I think you could probably get most of the type of capabilities that we now see with the models of my PhD if you spend a ton of more engineering effort scaling them up and making them more efficiently run on hardware, and maybe even building specific hardware for them and all of that. I think the big ideas of AI are, you want to have a very large neural network. I honestly think actually there's a huge equivalence class of neural networks. It doesn't have to be a transformer. Lots of others. We've explored, as the transformer came out, tons of models in our research papers with various kinds of attention and so on. But you want to have tons of data, tons of compute, large neural networks that are end-to-end trainable. You give it some input and it trains every aspect of that model. And that was what led us also to this prompt engineering idea that the task itself should also be an input to the model.
Nice.
Because it used to be like, oh, you do translation? This is my translation model. Oh, now you do sentiment analysis on Twitter? That's my sentiment analysis model. And we had to go one meta level higher to get to this idea of prompt engineering, that you can just ask the model and now the task is part of the input and it changes everything that the model does.
Very nice. So now you bring everything together in u.com. Help us very quick for somebody listening who is so familiar with u.com. So what does it stand for, and what is the vision?
So now u.com is a productivity engine that gives you answers, agents, and a path towards AGI for your company.
Right.
What does that mean? Answers can be a lot of things. Should I invest in the stock? Explain to me the tariff impact on manufacturing supply chains. Should I accept this claim as an insurance company? Yes or no? There are all kinds of different questions that we ask, and the more complex those questions are, the more you need to incorporate different kinds of knowledge, the more useful u.com becomes for you as a knowledge worker and your organization. And then agents will basically automate workflows for you. You say, oh, when I get this kind of PDF and I need to create a marketing campaign, and I go through these 5 steps, I look at my competitors, analyze this and that. You just explain that to an agent now, and then the agent does that work for you. And so we have kind of knowledge agents that are working very well. Our customers have created over 78,000 such agents for automating certain workflows and processes. And then there's AGI, which used to be sort of almost an overhyped term, but I think we're getting actually closer, and it starts to make sense for organizations to think about, what does that mean? So one thing we do, for instance, at u.com is we don't just throw this technology over the fence and say, go and be more efficient, right? We actually help train. We don't just run workshops, but we also have trainings that are role specific, where every employee of a company can get certified. So they actually know, I understand how to delegate my work in unambiguous ways to an agent, so I never have to do repetitive, boring work again.
I like that. Especially, yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And I also like to use u.com because I also see very detailed always the sources of the information.
That's right.
What I do miss at at other solutions sometimes. So it's really nice to really see directly where is it from.
If you can't trust the answers,
Exactly.
what are you doing, right? That's fine if you're just asking for the score of the game, and maybe it's 2-3,
Yeah.
maybe it's 1-2, but like, your life is not going to change that much. But if you go into a meeting and say, all right, the total addressable market for this space is this company is making this amount of growth and revenue, and people are like, no, those numbers are wrong.
Yeah.
Then you might lose your job, right? And you look really stupid. And you may make, mistakes for your whole company.
Yeah.
And so we focus on use cases and customers and industries where the accuracy really matters. So we work with large insurance companies and hedge funds and consulting firms and publishers also who deal with the facts.
Interesting. And also interesting how you said, okay, we just will be the competition to Google.com and Microsoft.
It used to be Google. Honestly, now it's more and more like enterprise software.
Right.
Yeah.
But how can you make such bold statements? Like, where do you get the confidence?
To me, it was obvious from first principles that you can build better technology and listable links to give
Yes.
people answers.
I
And
see.
so now I think we can see the space of search actually expanding. There are more and more kinds of questions. Like you wouldn't have asked Google back in the day, read me this like 200-page PDF and summarize it for me and then explain how that matters to my company. You just wouldn't have asked that to Google. There's no file uploaded, so on, right? So it's clear to me that the technology has enabled a new set of questions that we can answer, and then it becomes easier to make those
But
questions.
you always had this confidence. I think at Stanford, I see so many also young students having like huge confidence. I just this morning, I was running again in the morning around the Stanford campus. I love to just run around and get the energy there and see so many like students work on different projects, and whenever I have an interaction with some of them, they really, they really are bold in their way forward. When did you have that in your career that you said, I can change the world?
I think in the beginning, it's mostly like a desire to have impact, right? I think that's where it starts. If you don't have the desire, you're not going to do it. Right?
Yes.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think after that, you have to think about everything from first principles and say, like, is this something you can change? And then, when you do research, there are often benchmarks. You can actually see whether you are better than the others. And so even at U.com, we still run benchmarks, and we know we give more accurate answers than ChatGPT and a bunch of other small competitors that pretend to be the next Google, but just don't work as well in terms of the actual accuracy, but have sometimes better marketing than us still. And so there are a lot of things where you can actually verify, and then you build confidence. And then I think ultimately there is something in Silicon Valley that is very, very special, where people don't laugh at you when you have a big vision. They just say, well, does it make sense? Can you actually execute on it? And then if so, there's a lot of support for folks like that.
This is why companies in Silicon Valley are more successful as maybe anywhere else.
I think it's definitely a big part of it. It's amazing universities with Stanford and Berkeley. Then you combine that with amazing venture capitalists who understand power laws and know not every company has to work out, but they have to have, if they do work out, they have to have a fairly large, high ceiling of like where they can get to. It needs to be actually an ambitious vision that if it does succeed, it'll be epic. I feel like a lot of times in other parts of the world, I see like founders who pitch us at AIX and who, even if they succeeded, wouldn't be that epic. Like even if they were like everything worked out, they would be at most like a $200 million company.
Yeah.
But you need to have like most things go wrong. Like 90% of startups fail.
Right.
So when it does work, then at least it should be a very ambitious vision.
Sure. You mentioned AIX. That is your arm to invest in different AI startups and ventures. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I had the very good fortune after my first startup got acquired to have a lot of excess cash, and so I didn't really need to change my lifestyle that much. I kept living in my grad student apartment for many years, and so I just started to invest in all the smartest friends and founders and students and interns and employees and so on that I had. And turns out I was, fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of other really, really smart people. And they started companies that, are now massive valuations or multi-unicorns. And so, yeah, that worked out so well that at some point I thought, well, maybe we can scale this without necessarily scaling up my time, because I do want to still build things. So I co-founder of Sean Johnson and other amazing AI practitioners like Chris Manning, who was one of my advisors at Stanford, and Anthony Goldblum is also Kaggle co-founder, and now is also another founder of Sumble, another company. And we basically have teams that are AI practitioners and still have full-time jobs. And we have a standard sort of full-time venture team in the headquarters that do all the sort of standard venture capital things. And I think that is something that you need in a field like AI that moves so quickly. Like if you were an AI expert 10 years ago, you're not an AI expert anymore.
You are really bold in the entire AI space, whether your old company, now you.com, but also with different investments. Who will win the AI game? Is it now China or still Bugatti?
Sometimes it helps to drop the A in AI and just think of intelligence, and then think like, does my question still make sense when I drop the A from artificial intelligence? And then you're like, no one can win the intelligence game. Like, as there are lots of intelligent people, and you can use intelligence in every different aspect of life.
I like that.
And so I don't think there can be a single winner. I think everyone will win when there's more intelligence on the planet. And some of it may be artificial, some of it might be human. I do think China is very, very good at taking ideas and scaling them and making them cheaper and more efficient. It's been the case for several decades now. Shouldn't be that surprising that it's also the case in AI. We are seeing now along various dimensions, especially in robotics, for instance, China not just copying, but also out innovating everyone else. Like some of the Unity robots, for instance, that you can see with 4 legs and each leg has a wheel. And that is very, very impressive. And we haven't seen that anywhere else. And yeah, it's AI technology too. They're pushing, and because they have to be more innovative, because they don't have access to as many GPUs, so just import restrictions.
Right.
They're gonna eventually have their own chips. They're just gonna build them with them, and then there's even less dependency on the rest of the world. And yeah, they have a lot of momentum right now, and a lot of energy behind AI. Versus like Europe, for instance, where there's just mostly skepticism and how should we regulate it, even though it's not even taking off yet in Europe. They already want to over-regulate it and kind of kill it before it can even get started. And China is just the opposite. They're just like, okay, jobs change, whatever. We're like, overall the economy will be more productive. Let's go. So there's some advantages to that. But at the same time, most of the really good novel ideas are coming out of the US and to a large degree, actually Canada.
Yeah. And at the end, it's also always about use cases as well, right? So what actually will be also implemented on our day-to-day work and life. Yes. To talk a little bit about some of your awards, it would be very long, but let me just mention some we haven't talked about yet. One is Best Computer Science Dissertation Award from Stanford University, Time 100 AI list of most influential people, an honored doctorate from the Technical University in Dresden, a GABA Award, U.com, also that name of Time's Best Innovation in 2020. Looking back, what is your superpower? And what are you most proud of?
It's a little bit weird to talk about that for yourself, but I think seeing the future before it's obvious to a lot of other people is something that I really enjoy, and I just enjoy it so much. I can't help but spend time on that.
How do you do this? You read different studies, you watch TV, you watch Netflix, or you just spend time by yourself?
It's a mix of learning and then allowing yourself to wander in your mind, in your thought cloud, and thinking about where could the world go? Where should the world go? How could we make this better? Try to drop other assumptions that people think have to be there. Try to think, the sort of outside the box. Try to think from first principles, like what is really necessary and how people are doing something right now, and what isn't really necessary, and where are the bottlenecks, and so on. So I think that is a big part, and that's something that I enjoy doing a lot. And then you have to combine that with just not giving up, like that grit that we look for also in founders and CEOs. Like, have to have this almost dogged determination to be like, that is the thing. Like, I had this strong belief that neural networks would be the right path for natural language processing, but most of my papers in my PhD got rejected. And I've had desk rejections where people said, this doesn't even make sense at this conference. Why would you even submit a neural networks paper to an NLP conference? And just rejected the paper. And it took me another year to get it out. And so during those years, and then, of course, in the startup, you have rejections from venture capital, who are like, oh, search can never be changed. Why would you do search? And then 2 years later, everyone's like, oh, like now search is super hot. And of course we can change it. And, if they had believed me a little bit more, maybe it could have been even bigger. Right. And so there are these many rejections that you have to deal with when you try to make big changes in the world, and you just have to keep at it. And it's not always easy. Like, it's easy to say, after the fact, when everything worked out well, and you have the citations now, and you're like, oh, now I can talk about those rejections. But in the moment, they're pretty soul crushing, and you just have to keep on going.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I also, as an entrepreneur myself, sometimes I wonder how healthy it is not to be able to give up. Yeah, well, like for me, it's like sometimes also, and even some business partners of mine told me, no, Michael, we should close this part of the business. And I was so stubborn. And now 2 years later, I was right. But it was also a bit of a pain to go there, if it makes sense. So it was, maybe it would have been right to close it, but the stubbornness pushed the perseverance to do this. So I think it's but it's a good trait of a founder to really push through. I think that's so true. I also asked this question to some of your team members who work for you at Superpower. What do you think they said?
I don't know. I'm curious. I never asked them that.
So many said that for sure they put you in a very smart category who can connect some of the dots. So it's very similar to what you said. And I think so that goes in the right direction. What is your weakness?
Probably connecting too many dots, right? Okay. Seeing too many connections, like trying to build a very general purpose tool and not like appreciating the fact that people need to have their language be spoken to them. Like yesyou.com could be used for thousands of different things. Right. But we started making real progress when we said we're selling this product for this ideal customer profile. Like consultants, financial analysts, publishers, they can use this. We talk to them, and our sales team speaks their language. And that's when we started making real strides as a business versus just, you can use this for everything. Here's an example that, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And then you think, oh, this is the only thing it can do. It can only, I gave them one example and they think this tool is only made for this. I'm like, no, you can do something completely different. They're like, oh, wow. So it can do these two things. I get it. And I'm like, no, you can do this other third thing. And so you have to speak the language of the customer, and you have to understand what they also are looking for. And you have to understand trends, and you can't just say, this is a better thing for humanity. Here's a paper, we show that it's better. You have to, people have to want it, right? And they have to want it at the right time. And so I think that that sort of strength can also be a weakness, and you have to balance that out with the right team members. And generally, fortunately, as a CEO, once you understand your weaknesses, you can then hire for those weaknesses. And so you can hire very pragmatic people who just say all right, this is our quarterly goal, and we're just gonna keep chugging along on that quarterly goal. And so that's also helped. And it's something in general to appreciate. You can see this with a lot of other great leaders and entrepreneurs and intellectuals and just all kinds of impactful people, where you can see the strength, and you can see sometimes when the strength is so strong, it can become a weakness. And then knowing and acknowledging that about yourself and having that introspection and zooming out and kind of looking at it can help you kind of balance things out.
So true. Of course, I also had to ask your team members, what is his weakness? What do you don't like so much about him sometimes? And they also said focus. So you really spot on. Good job. Yeah. So that sometimes to keep the focus. But one thing, how you also implement that, and I think that's also a a good hint for everyone listening who's an entrepreneur that you also have some focus time. I had the pleasure to also visit you at your farm at home, all around nature, and also sometimes to spend some time to sit down and think about certain things. My wife just told me yesterday on the phone that she said, Michael, you know how little people actually at least once a week sit down and just think for an hour, and the best things often come out because we kind of have some knowledge already inside us. Is it also what do you like to do?
100%. Yeah. I don't, yeah, I'm mostly an introvert and I enjoy, just thinking about things. And, yeah, that's part of why I'm writing a book right now too. It just like gives me sort of an excuse to say, all right, my thinking is like going in a directed way and something productive I can then share with others and so on. Yeah.
What would be for you more important, to be really wealthy and rich or to be really famous? Is there one trait you would say one is more important for you than the other? To have really impact and be famous for that, or to be really rich?
I think the second formulation of your question is that makes it easy. I think the impact is much more important to me than the money.
Of course, now it's also that you already reached a certain level with exit and so on.
It's true, but that actually, honestly, was always the case. Like I never cared about money. And it's sort of serendipitous and the magic of Silicon Valley that I ended up with as much as I have. Just chasing the impact and trying to build something that people like to use, and that at this point, like, can move AI as a field forward. And that's what's driven me as an academic for over a decade, and some degree still now at U.com. I love, for instance, that the fact that the Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein and Oppenheimer worked, is a customer of U.com. They're not our biggest customer, it's not like a 50,000 people company and so on. But it's just amazing that these extremely talented and intelligent folks use our tool to do research, to understand the world better, to push knowledge frontiers forward. And so, we have some German universities too that are ramping up right now, which I'm very excited about. And so it's very meaningful to me, and certainly something I care more about than like my personal.
To really do an impact. I like that. Of course, I think it's so essential, and also what AI can do for an impact, right? So you have now Neuralink or then connected, and some people who could not use their arm anymore now have a connection that they can use an arm with AI. But when is a human still a human, and when it will be a machine or robot?
I think as long as we, have our own conscious thoughts and determinations and can basically make decisions and take actions and have our unique thoughts, I think there's probably no obvious physical limitations that I can think of. Right now, there's no other substrate that we know of that's as good as the human brain to really have such conscious thoughts. But ultimately, I think the beauty of AI is that it's a way for us to understand intelligence generally better. Like right now, we only have one truly intelligent existence proof, and that's the human brain. But once we build another very intelligent system, then we know, oh, wow, you can have a different way. Like a plane can fly differently to a bird, right? And so we can now understand aerodynamics at a higher level of abstraction. And so I think it was Feynman who said, what I can build, I can understand, right? And so as you can replicate intelligence, we understand the very nature of intelligence better. And, in some ways, our generation is too late to explore, different oceans and new continents and so on. We're too early to explore, different planets and the galaxies, but we're right on time to build superintelligence. And so it's actually an incredibly exciting time to be alive right now. And I'm sometimes dismayed at how many people don't have the luxury of thinking about that. Like they're just still stuck in like politics and other things, and like these people have this resource and we want to fight over that resource, and you're just like, man, like you should just come together and let's all work on AI together.
I had yesterday lunch with a good friend of mine who has also PhD in AI. This also here in Silicon Valley, and he has robot dogs who are fully independent, And he says, Michael, I believe they should also have an American passport. I said, look, for me, this is a bit far ahead. How do you see that? So
It's definitely not too far ahead right now.
So you think that will happen, and also that they can, copy themselves, basically, that they can decide for themselves more and more?
Right now, no robodog will have like a reason to have their own passport. There are still mostly tools. Again, I don't think that has to always be the case. I'm very optimistic that eventually we can build incredibly intelligent entities. And I'm certainly excited about maybe being able to participate in that world and on that research in the future. It's just right now, it's just not the case yet. So
Right. But right now, it's of course still the case that with prompt engineering, we are already really far ahead. How far will it go?
that's a great question. It's actually a whole chapter in my book that I'm working on what are the upper bounds of intelligence. It's actually a highly non-trivial question, and the only way you can answer it is by categorizing different groups of intelligence. There's language intelligence, there's knowledge, there's just the somewhat interconnected dimension of speed. Like maybe trees are intelligent, it's just they're moving so slow that to us they're super stupid. But if you speed up certain like videos of like vines trying to find like a place to hang on to, like you're like, oh wow, maybe they have more agency than we give them credit for. And now if you had an alien that was like 1,000x faster than us, we would look like super slow and lame too, and not very intelligent. So there are all these different dimensions and interconnected categories of intelligence and predictive abilities and compression abilities of knowledge. And so along each of these different dimensions, there are some upper bounds, and in some cases we're very close to them. In other cases, we're quite literally astronomically far away, and we can still grow for a very, very long time.
I think it's super interesting time. And you see AI being a buzzword on the one hand, but now finding more and more real good use cases.
Right.
And your wife, Nancy, is also in the AI game and really runs a very successful business. And how is it to live in a two-founder household?
I think if both founders are just loving and kind, it is fine. But you have to kind of acknowledge that the other person may also be very, very stressed in that moment. Just generally true, probably even if one of us wasn't a founder. And then we kind of created some sort of processes. I don't want to call them processes, but it's just some like cute moments of connection, you could call them too, where most evenings we sit down together and we give each other our daily sort of debriefs and updates about the day. And the rule is that when one person kind of describes, oh, like there's something, this employee or this kind of investor or this kind of product or whatever it might be, the other person is not allowed to say, oh, that reminds me of a problem I'm having also that is kind of similar. And you just have to engage with what's on the other person's mind and see how we can help. And I'm very fortunate that both of us are very constructive and try to be pragmatically problem solving.
Right.
I hear sometimes, and I've like seen this elsewhere, where like some people just say, I just want to complain to you. I don't want you to come back with a solution. But we're both very much like, this is my problem. Let's jam on a solution. And I was like, okay, that was helpful. Like moving on to the next problem. Let me take some notes. And then we go back to it. And this is like, it's very, constructively optimistic, I would say, in trying to build the future. And this constructive optimism, I think you can zoom out all the way to like planetary scale things where you say, okay, maybe we could go to Mars. But until then, each year we just make the price of sending 1 pound of stuff into space a little bit cheaper each year. And then you have a successful company, right? And so I think that is something that I also, because I personally don't want to overhype, right? I'm still German to some degree and academic, and I don't like it when people over promise and then under deliver. But I have to acknowledge that when you have a really exciting vision, it's okay to not always meet all milestones, as long as you do make pragmatic progress each year towards it. No one's going to complain if you make more and more revenue every year that you're not yet like a multi-trillion-dollar company, right? And so I think that balance is something that you see in the Bay Area also done quite well.
Yeah, very, very true. And sometimes, of course, you don't know how the solution will look later on compared how you started. Like I just talked to one VC a week ago, and he said, Michael, I never really invest only in the idea. I only invest in the people and the market, because the idea never ever turned out to be exactly the solution later on. I think that's also important to understand, that we permanently need to reinvent ourselves, our companies. Otherwise, we are called up BlackBerry.
Especially in early stage investing, you often invest in the people. Of course, the people need to be intelligent and be able to communicate why their idea makes sense.
Right.
You can be, and I think some people call it strong convictions loosely held. You have a strong conviction, this is the thing, you're going to charge for it. But if you learned enough about it and it makes sense to pivot, then you pivot, right? Like first, we were also a pure consumer company, and then we realized people don't ask enough complicated questions for them to want to switch. Most people don't switch their defaults. Chat ads don't work nearly as well as search ads. People who really love this technology usually are knowledge workers, and they love us for the accuracy. So let's lean into that. And then, you adjust, and then eventually you find something. If you keep working on it and you acknowledge, you can get better and better, and you iterate. That's when you eventually have true success.
It's so true. And I think it's also super important to also change their own opinion when you have new data, right? I mean, two people, I think sometimes maybe are too stubborn, and I really try, and I hope my team is saying that about me, that I'm able to change my opinion when I have new data, even if I was very bold on let's go all left. But if I get new data on this point, to go right. And I actually heard this also from your team. That's that one thing where I really admire, is that you're able to change your opinion when you have also new clear data. So that's a good trait to have.
Trust, facts, and kindness are our three sort of corporate values. And the facts, are saying one thing, you've got to update.
Yeah, I like that. At the end, very quick, you're also a big fan of longevity, and you want to be 200 years old.
Minimum.
What are you doing to reach there, and why you want to be 200 years old?
Of course, like, I don't think anybody wants to be 200 years old if it means that you spend like 120 of those years in a wheelchair being demented and not being able to do anything interesting. The hope is that you have 200 years of sort of healthy, productive time. And with that sort of, thinking about health spans, I think there's an interesting transition right now. And I want to give Brian Johnson a lot of credit. He's pushing the Overton window quite a bit single-handedly in this space. But there are most of the incentives in healthcare are set up to say, all right, this person is now sick. These are the ways we fix that sickness. But at some point you can realize, like, well, age is the ultimate sickness that will eventually get you. And sometimes it gets you directly, sort of, but most of the time it gets you by eventually getting cancer or heart problems and other things, dementia. And so those are the three biggest ones. And so you can kind of, once you acknowledge that, you say, why don't we try to prevent those things from happening instead of only fixing them when they're already causing a problem? And I think a lot of people, I'm kind of surprised how much hate he gets online too, because ultimately he's trying to help people be healthier, right? And it's like, I think health and medicine is one of those things that most people don't appreciate it until they don't have it anymore. And then it's all that matters. And then they like really appreciate it. They're doctors and the people care, and there's biology researchers and drug pharma companies trying to build new kinds of molecules and all of that. And so I think it's ultimately very meaningful application of AI to apply to biology. And then generally what I do, I try to be better about my sleep. I've been pretty terrible about it for several decades.
Tracking it, Whoop, or with
tracking, just my Apple Watch and some apps. And then try to eat much healthier, kind of obvious, try to exercise better. So those are sort of the three basics that I do. And then I started just getting more measurements too. Function Health, I love. It's a company, 10 out of 10 net promoter score for me. On that, they do a full blood panel and just analyze like 200 different biomarkers in your blood, including cancer, some genes, and so on. So I'm like happy that I don't have this early onset Alzheimer's gene, which is kind of scary. And then they also tell you like, oh, you're low on copper and vitamin D and like blah, blah. So just like take supplements for those things that are easily supplementable. And then And then I do cold plunges. It's just like obvious. It's better for your joints if you run, especially try to do it after every workout. So I try to do it every day, but like many days, like it's not working out. And then I have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber.
Nice.
Try to do that every day now. And
How long are you?
it's usually 90 minutes, but the nice thing is you just work on your laptop. You can have Zoom meetings. So it's just like,
And it is not doesn't influence you much. Yeah. I actually been in once, but I had to lay down. So nice. You have some nice things to sit.
yeah. So if it's big enough, you can bring your laptop in as you breathe in the oxygen. It's not everywhere. Then it's a much better setup.
Nice.
And that way you can do it more. Like I knew if I had to be downtime for 90 minutes, I would just never do it. So.
No, interesting. So lots of basic things and some advanced things as well, where maybe not everybody can have a chamber at home, but definitely have a cold plunge, whether it's a local lake,
That's right.
or a cold plunge. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, and this is true for longevity too, a lot of things are first like only accessible to wealthy people.
Right.
And then some people are like, oh, it's already bad because it's like almost everything. Yeah, stem cell therapies are a good example, like IVF and so on. It used to be like only the ultra wealthy can do it. Now almost everyone can do it. Like in fact, it was so cheap that 23andMe couldn't stay alive, like selling it, right? It's like a one-time thing in other times. But long story short, like I think longevity is a similar trend where first it's like a vitamin and eventually it becomes a painkiller, and then AI can help scale it to. And by the time, and this is something a lot of people don't appreciate, I think enough, when technology can really go deeply into a field, and it scales because there's enough demand, then you end up in situations where a billionaire and a middle-class teenager use the exact same device every day for hours.
Yeah.
Right. It's actually truly incredible. And you can think about what are other goods and services that billionaires have access to that are bottleneck on intelligence. And then you can appreciate how AI is going to give more people access to personal tutors for their kids, personal healthcare teams that analyze all the measurements and everything, personal assistants and so on. Those things will all come in the next couple of years. And they'll just make all of us more productive and eventually have access to not just knowledge, but delegation abilities that currently only very wealthy people have access to. And so in many ways, like I think, yeah, I'm long-term very optimistic. Short-term, there will be disruptions and complexities, and we need to, have good social systems and safety nets to support people in these transitions. But long-term, future has been fairly amazing for almost like the average person over the last several thousand years.
What industries do you see the most changes in because of AI in the future? Do you see some way say, okay, this, of course, search, of course, one.
The most obvious ones are like digitized jobs, digital marketing, digital sales, digital service, automation, answering people's questions, research work, analyst work, hedge funds, investments, like all those jobs where there is a lot of data, you can automate really, really well with AI. And then the less data there is, the longer it will take for AI to get there. Like the physical sciences is kind of what my book is about too. Physics, chemistry, biology. It's just everything is slower. There's less data, so it will take longer for AI to have that impact. But actually, we're here in the office, and we're here because I was just a judge on a hackathon from a company called Vivo that we invested in AIX. That just open sourced a new data set for drug cell interactions and gene expressions and so on. And like it's the largest data set of that kind, and that is the kind of novelty and requirement for AI to then have impact in biology, for instance. And what's interesting also is biology and medicine and generally research are sort of areas where most people agree that they just want the outputs of that industry. And they don't want to create more jobs in that industry.
Super interesting. Richard, it has been an honor to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Great questions.
Before you go, a quick note to all the entrepreneurial listeners out there. If you're looking for a reliable and efficient way to scale your online business and payments, I highly recommend checking out Copecard.com. It's designed to streamline your processes from payment processing to customer management, all in one platform. Whether you're just starting out or you're looking to scale up, Copecard provides the tools you need to succeed. Visit Copecard.com today and see how it can transform your business operations. Dive in and start optimizing your sales processes now.